proportional representation system. I mean, I personally have, thought long and hard about what's the point of the system. The system doesn't make any sense. It only really benefits the party, and then in that regard, the party elite. But when we think about the history of why the system came into play, it was really because of the sheer amount of inequality in South Africa. Which means that the gentleman in the back talks about if he had $2 million, he'd be president. Well, it would mean that in a society like ours, where you have blessers and blessees, and it's a real thing. If you then changed it to be, direct representation in our system, you would find that eventually most of your all of your votes are actually going for sale. And there are countries where it really is quite bizarre, where you have a parliament with high amounts of criminals, or the Brazilian case was interesting, where they threw out the president. Apparently, ostensibly, had no corruption charges or corruptional issues, and everybody else who was throwing her out did. And that's one of the consequences of a direct representation system, especially in a country that has a high level of inequality, and there's a high contestation for resources and a low amount of mobility from one class to another. So I don't think that the time is ripe for us to change the system. I think that what needs to happen is society needs to find ways of keeping the politicians, their political apparatuses and organizations honest. We speak about protests, and you mentioned this thing, why would people protest? Why don't they just vote? I keep saying protest is a language. But, with any language, you start out with a few words, very basic, and then over the years, you develop a much more refined, sophisticated lexicon. And I think that's, we are at a very basic level of speaking protest. So the protest has to be physical and seen, and there has to be a fire. I think as time goes on, you'll find that people begin to explore different forms of this same protest. So the protest action need not look the same. There's different forms of protest, or different forms of displaying your displeasure with the status quo. So I'm really excited, or even anxious, to see the lexicon of protest language expand and grow and become more sophisticated, such that an activist in about 10, 20 years can say, well, this issue we're going to tackle using that tool, and that other issue we're going to tackle using that tool. So for there, we'll definitely get guys out in buses, and for there, we're just going to use a petition, and for there, we're going to do something else around it. We're going to withhold our rate payments. So there's a smorgasbord of options that I think South Africans aren't yet exploring, but I think they will begin to explore, because the amount of attention you're getting now from people running through the streets begins to diminish. There's a cycle of diminishing returns in terms of the same type of protest. So I don't think protest is wrong. I personally like protests. But I think that we're finding that we're going to find that the types of protests just kind of becomes more sophisticated.
You started off by asking, why don't people just vote? Because the answer, apart from all the other good answers that have been given, is that the range of options for people who vote is very narrow. There's only one major political party that's articulating an economic alternative that isn't the kind of orthodoxy that's keeping the vast majority of people in this country in poverty. And that's the EFF. And there are all sorts of other reasons why people who don't vote EFF don't want to vote EFF. And of course, voting happens once for the national parliament, once every 5 years. Democracy isn't just something that happens at elections, it happens between elections. It's the process of making your political opinion and your political voice count in a variety of different ways, on a variety of different occasions. So voting is not even the beginning of politics, but it's a very basic form of politics, actually, and representation. The idea that you delegate your political power to someone else who goes and sits in a chamber and votes from an a la carte menu of policy options for you is a very odd and rarefied form of democratic participation, if you ask me. Much more natural forms of participation seem to me to be protest, participation in meetings, and taking to the streets and instructing a lawyer to sue the state for your constitutional rights, or if you're lucky enough to be able to do that. There are lots of voting is just one of an entire smorgasbord of options people might have. Let's not fall into the trap of thinking that patronage politics is something distinctly African or South African. I don't see any difference between the role of money in this country and the role of money in politics in this country and the role of money in politics in the United States. Gentleman back there said, $2 million and I can be president of Malawi. I think the price tag of the US presidency is about 10 billion. At least that's how much Donald Trump says he has on Tuesday. On Wednesday it's something different. The only difference I'd say about South Africa is that we're just much more honest about it than most, certainly the American system and many European systems. Corruption is there. You just have to see what form it's taking.
This is the way in which politics operates, and it's a feature, patronage networks are features of politics everywhere. During Brexit, Boris Johnson was found to have accepted a donation from a British National Party, which is a neo-Nazi party, a donation of £700,000, and people have said this has bought the right to bigotry almost that's now playing out. And then Italy's very corrupt, you know, in terms of international comparisons. So yeah, so definitely patronage networks. I think it's just how politics works.